This is the homework for 8th grade SBAC review, Wednesday, EMC 8. For number 1, Oscar's doghouse is shaped like a tent. So I'm going to draw what a tent would look like. So here's the doghouse. The slanted sides are both 5 feet long. So here are the slanted sides. They're both 5 feet long. And the bottom of the house is 6 feet across. What is the height of the doghouse in feet at its tallest point? So here's the height of the doghouse. So we don't know that. Well, you see, if we find the height, it divides this triangle into 2 smaller triangles. And since we're going straight up, we created a right angle, which creates a right triangle. So if all the way across is 6 feet, halfway across will be 3 feet. Now, you may have identified that this is a 3, 4, 5 triangle, a special right triangle. If you didn't, then you would have to be able to solve for x. So to solve for x, we need to use Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I usually put the shortest side for a, so we have a squared plus x squared, it's unknown, equals the hypotenuse squared. 3 squared is 9, 5 squared is 25, subtract 9 from both sides, and 25 minus 9 is 16. Here, now we have x squared equals 16. Inverse property of squaring is to take the square root. Those cancel each other out, and the square root of 16 equals 4. So the tallest point of the doghouse is 4 feet. For number 2, the sides of a triangle are 30, 38, and 50. Do the sides of this triangle form a right triangle? Well, remember, the 2 shortest sides are the legs of a right triangle, and the longest side is going to be the hypotenuse. And we want to determine if this is a right triangle. For this to be a right triangle, we would have to have a squared plus b squared equal c squared, or the leg squared plus the second leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So we're going to use Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we have 30 squared plus 38 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. If this is true, this is a right triangle. 30 squared is 900, 38 squared is 1,444, and 50 squared is 2,500. 900 plus 1,444 equals 2,344, and that does not equal 2,500. Since a squared plus b squared does not equal c squared, then the sides do not form a right triangle. For number 3, a right triangle has sides that measure 3 inches and 5 inches. What are the 2 possible lengths of the third side? So we know the sides are 3 and 5. So 3 and 5 is one option, and 3 and 5 here. Well, if this is 3 and this is 5, this is a 3, 4, 5 triangle. If you didn't recognize it, then you would have to do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So 3 squared plus b squared equals 5 squared. 9 plus b squared equals 25. Subtract 9 from both sides, and we get b squared equals 16. Inverse property of squaring is taking the square root. Those cancel out. Square root of 16 is 4, so b equals 4. That's one possible. The other possibility is 3 and 5. Now, we can't have 3 here as the hypotenuse, because remember, the longest side is the hypotenuse. So if you have one of the legs is 5, the hypotenuse cannot be 3. So this is our second option. So we have 3 squared. So we're using Pythagorean theorem. We have 3 squared plus 5 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. 3 squared is 9, 5 squared is 25. So x squared equals 34. Take the square root of x squared, which is the inverse operation. What you do to one side, you do to the other. So we have the square root of 34 equals x, or x equals the square root of 34. Number 4 is similar to number 3. Two sides of a right triangle have the lengths of the square root of 10 and the square root of 6. There are two possible lengths for the third side. So let's work on the first one. And we're using Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So the square root of 6 squared, the square root of 6 squared, plus the square root of 10 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. Well, remember, squaring a square root are inverse properties. So they cancel each other out. So square root of 6 squared is 6. The square root of 10 squared is 10. 6 plus 10 is 16. Now we have c squared. Inverse property is taking the square root. They cancel out. So c equals 4. The second possible way to set up with these given lengths is with the square root of 10 as the hypotenuse. Remember, the square root of 6 cannot be the hypotenuse because the square root of 10 is greater than the square root of 6, and the hypotenuse is always the greatest length. So we use, again, Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we have a squared plus square root of 6 squared equals the square root of 10 squared. These are inverse operations, so they cancel each other out. Now we have a squared plus 6 equals 10. Inverse property of addition is subtraction, created a 0 pair. 10 minus 6 is 4. Now we have a squared equals 4. To get rid of this square, we take the square root, inverse property. What you do to one side, you do to the other. And so now the square root of 4 equals 2. So a equals 2.